Yeah, I think stuff to do with family.
The announcement came at precisely 9:37 on a gray Thursday morning, delivered not through the usual channels of palace protocol, but directly from Kensington Palace in a tone so sharp it could cut glass. Following review of recent household directives, the Prince of Wales has determined that certain orders issued earlier this week do not align with the operational priorities of the royal family and are therefore rescinded effective immediately. It took the press exactly 4 minutes to understand what had happened. Prince William had just publicly reversed an order given by Queen Camilla, and in doing so, he had done something the monarchy rarely permits. He had humiliated a senior royal in full view of the world. The reversal. The first indication that something had gone catastrophically wrong came not from official channels but from a junior staff member at Clarence House who arrived for work that Thursday morning to find the building in a state of barely controlled chaos. Senior aides moved through hallways with tight expressions, speaking in hushed tones. Phones rang incessantly, and in the Queen Consort's private office, the atmosphere was described by one witness as glacial. Camilla had issued her directive 3 days earlier. It concerned the restructuring of charitable patronage assignments, specifically the reallocation of several organizations that had traditionally fallen under William and Catherine's portfolio. The order, distributed through official palace memoranda, stated that effective immediately, oversight of 4 major charities focused on youth, mental health, and early childhood development would transition to the Queen Consort's office for better coordination and unified messaging. On paper, the directive seemed reasonable. Camilla had spent years building her own charitable identity, and consolidating similar causes under one umbrella could streamline efforts. But the problem was not the logic, it was the execution. Camilla had issued the order without consulting William, without seeking approval from the King's office, and most damningly, without acknowledging that the charities in question had been personally cultivated by Catherine over nearly a decade of dedicated work. When William's team received the memorandum on Monday afternoon, the reaction was immediate and severe. One senior advisor described it as a line crossed. Another called it a power grab disguised as efficiency. But William himself said nothing initially. He read the document twice, his expression unreadable, then asked his private secretary a single question: "Did my father authorize this?" The answer came back within the hour. No, King Charles had not been consulted. The directive had come solely from Camilla's office, signed with her authority as Queen Consort but issued without the institutional checks that normally governed such decisions. This was not coordination. This was unilateral action. And for William, whose patience with competing power centers had already worn thin over recent months, it was the final provocation. For 2 days, William deliberated. He consulted with Catherine, who was quietly furious at having her life's work reassigned without acknowledgement. He spoke with Princess Anne, who bluntly told him that allowing the order to stand would set a dangerous precedent. And he reviewed constitutional protocol with legal advisors, confirming that as Prince of Wales and heir to the throne, he possessed the authority to countermand directives that undermined clear lines of succession planning. By Wednesday evening, the decision was made. William would not simply reverse Camilla's order privately. He would do so publicly, through an official statement that left no ambiguity about who held operational authority within the royal household. The reversal would be swift, decisive, and humiliating in its clarity. When the statement went live Thursday morning, the palace press office received over 200 inquiries within 15 minutes. Journalists immediately understood the significance. This was not routine administrative correction. This was a future king asserting dominance over a queen consort who had overstepped her bounds. And the fact that William had chosen to make it public rather than handle it quietly sent an unmistakable message. The days of ambiguity about power within the monarchy were over. At Clarence House, Camilla received word of the reversal while reviewing briefing papers for an afternoon engagement. According to sources present, she went completely still, the color draining from her face as she read William's statement. She said nothing for a long moment, then quietly asked her staff to leave the room. What happened in the privacy of that office remains unknown, but those who saw her emerge 20 minutes later described her expression as one of profound shock mixed with barely contained rage. The reversal had been swift, public, and absolutely devastating. And across London, in newsrooms and palace corridors alike, one question dominated every conversation. How had it come to this? The order that sparked it all. To understand why William responded with such unprecedented force, we must examine not just what Camilla ordered, but the pattern of behavior that led to this breaking point. Because this was not an isolated incident. It was the culmination of months of mounting tension over Camilla's attempts to expand her influence within an institution that had already defined the boundaries of her role. The trouble had begun in early autumn, when Camilla's staff proposed a comprehensive review of royal patronages, ostensibly to eliminate duplication and improve efficiency. The proposal seemed benign, even sensible, but beneath the administrative language lay a more ambitious agenda: the repositioning of Camilla as a central coordinator of royal charitable work, rather than simply one participant among many. William's team had raised concerns immediately. The monarchy's strength, they argued, came from its distributed model of patronage, where each senior royal developed deep expertise in specific causes. Consolidating oversight under one office would not improve efficiency, it would simply concentrate power. But Camilla's advisors pushed forward, insisting that modern institutions required streamlined leadership. The first concrete move came in October, when Camilla's office quietly approached 3 charities affiliated with mental health advocacy, organizations that had worked closely with William and Catherine for years, suggesting that future coordination might benefit from centralized royal representation. The charities, confused by the mixed messaging, contacted Kensington Palace for clarification. That was when William first realized how aggressively Camilla's team was operating. He addressed it directly in a private meeting at Clarence House. The conversation, described by one participant as tense but civil, centered on the need for clear boundaries. William explained that each senior royal needed autonomy over their own charitable portfolio. Camilla agreed verbally but took no concrete steps to rein in her staff's activities. Then came the directive. On Monday, November 25th, Camilla's office distributed the memorandum, reallocating 4 major charities from Catherine's portfolio to the Queen Consort's oversight. The organizations in question, all focused on early years development and children's mental health, represented the core of Catherine's public identity. She had spent over a decade building relationships with these groups, visiting facilities, shaping policy discussions, and becoming genuinely expert in the field. The memorandum offered no explanation for the change beyond administrative efficiency. It did not acknowledge Catherine's work. It did not request consultation. It simply announced the transfer as a fait accompli, effective within 2 weeks. When Catherine read it, those present said she stared at the document in disbelief before asking quietly, did she really think this would be acceptable? William's anger was colder and more controlled. He recognized the move for what it was, not an administrative adjustment, but a direct challenge to his authority and a dismissal of his wife's contributions. Camilla had effectively declared that Catherine's decade of work could be reassigned at will, that the future queen's charitable identity mattered less than the current queen consort's desire for expanded influence. But there was another dimension that made the situation even more egregious: the timing. The directive had been issued during a week when Catherine was managing a particularly demanding schedule, when Charles was dealing with health monitoring that required reduced stress, and when William was coordinating sensitive diplomatic communications. It was as though Camilla had specifically chosen a moment of maximum vulnerability to assert her authority. Princess Anne, when informed of the situation, responded with characteristic directness. "This is precisely why unclear succession planning creates chaos," she told William during a phone call Tuesday evening. "Camilla believes her position as queen consort grants her operational authority. You must disabuse her of that notion immediately, or this pattern will continue." Anne's words crystallized what William had already been thinking. This was not about 4 charities. This was about establishing once and for all that the Prince of Wales held operational authority within the royal household, and that the queen consort's role, while honored and important, remained subordinate to the direct line of succession. By Wednesday, William had made his decision. The reversal would be public, unambiguous, and immediate. There would be no private negotiation, no face-saving compromise. Camilla had chosen to act publicly through official memoranda. William would respond in kind, and if that caused humiliation, so be it. Some lessons, he had concluded, could only be learned through the sting of public correction. The public confrontation. The statement from Kensington Palace landed with the force of a diplomatic incident. Following review of recent household directives, the Prince of Wales has determined that certain orders issued earlier this week do not align with the operational priorities of the royal family, and are therefore rescinded effective immediately. Charitable patronages will remain under the oversight of the royals who have cultivated them, ensuring continuity and expertise in service delivery. What made the statement so devastating was not just its content, but its tone. There was no softening language, no acknowledgement of good intentions, no diplomatic courtesy. It was a direct public rebuke delivered in language that left no room for interpretation. William had not simply disagreed with Camilla's directive. He had overturned it and done so in a manner that made clear he possessed the authority to do so without consultation or negotiation. Within minutes, the palace press corps exploded into activity. Royal correspondents who had covered the family for decades described the statement as unprecedented in its directness. One veteran journalist noted, "In all my years, I have never seen a future monarch publicly contradict a queen consort. This is not just a policy disagreement, this is a power statement." The reaction on social media was immediate and sharply divided. Supporters of William praised his decisiveness, arguing that Catherine's work deserved protection and that Camilla had overreached. Critics, particularly those sympathetic to Camilla's long journey to acceptance, viewed the public reversal as unnecessarily harsh and humiliating. But across all reactions ran a common thread. Everyone understood that the dynamics of power within the monarchy had just fundamentally shifted. At Clarence House, the humiliation was acute. Staff members who had worked on the charitable restructuring proposal found themselves in an impossible position. Their work, endorsed by the Queen Consort and distributed through official channels, had been publicly invalidated. Several asked whether they should resign. Others questioned whether Camilla had been properly advised about the risks of issuing such a directive. Camilla herself maintained public silence, but privately, sources described her as devastated and furious in equal measure. She had believed, genuinely, that her role as Queen Consort carried the authority to make operational decisions about charitable coordination. To have that belief so publicly and definitively crushed felt like a repudiation of everything she had worked to build. The four charities caught in the middle responded with diplomatic care. Each issued brief statements thanking both the Queen Consort and the Prince and Princess of Wales for their continued support, carefully avoiding any language that might suggest they had taken sides. But privately, charity directors expressed relief. They had built productive relationships with Catherine over years of collaboration and had been genuinely confused by the sudden reassignment. By midday Thursday, broadcast news had picked up the story. BBC ran a segment analyzing the constitutional implications of William's reversal. Sky News brought in royal historians to discuss precedent for public disagreements between senior royals. And American networks, always eager for royal drama, framed the story as a power struggle between the current queen and the future one, a narrative that oversimplified the situation but captured public imagination. The most damaging coverage came from a respected royal correspondent who had obtained additional details about the original directive. Her reporting revealed that Camilla's memorandum had not only reassigned the charities, but had also proposed bringing their existing staff under Clarence House oversight, effectively dismantling the infrastructure Catherine had built. This detail transformed the narrative from administrative disagreement to something far more personal, an attempt to erase Catherine's legacy. When that reporting aired, public sympathy swung decisively toward William and Catherine. Even those who had initially viewed the reversal as harsh began to understand it as necessary protection against an overreach that went beyond policy into personal territory. The headline on one major news site captured the shift: "William protects Catherine's legacy after Camilla attempts takeover." By evening, the reversal had become the dominant story across British media, and in the quiet corridors of Buckingham Palace, senior advisors who had once worried about William being too cautious found themselves reassessing. The future king had just demonstrated that when pushed, he would respond with decisive force. The era of deference to Camilla's feelings, it seemed, had ended. Behind palace doors. King Charles learned of William's statement approximately 15 minutes before it went public. His private secretary delivered the news during a morning briefing at Buckingham Palace, handing him a printed copy with a quiet warning that the situation was about to become very complicated. Charles read it twice, his expression growing heavier with each line. The king found himself in an impossible position. On one hand, he understood William's frustration. Camilla had overstepped, issuing directives without proper consultation and encroaching on Catherine's carefully built charitable work. The reversal, while harsh, was constitutionally defensible and operationally necessary. But on the other hand, Camilla was his wife, a woman who had endured decades of public scrutiny and had finally achieved a measure of respect and authority. To see that authority so publicly diminished caused him genuine pain. Charles made 2 phone calls that morning. The first was to William, a brief conversation in which he expressed understanding of the decision while noting that the public nature of the reversal would have consequences. William's response was respectful but firm. The directive was public. The reversal needed to be equally public. Private corrections would have allowed the pattern to continue. The second call was to Camilla. That conversation lasted longer and was described by those aware of it as emotionally difficult. Charles tried to explain William's perspective while acknowledging Camilla's hurt, but the fundamental tension remained unresolved. Camilla believed she had been humiliated for attempting to do her job. Charles believed William had been forced to protect institutional clarity. Both were right in their own way, and that made reconciliation nearly impossible. Princess Anne's reaction was characteristically direct. When contacted by palace officials seeking her perspective, she offered a brief statement that would later be quoted widely. "The Prince of Wales has clarified the operational structure of the household. This is appropriate and necessary. The institution functions best when roles are clearly defined." Her lack of sympathy for Camilla's position surprised no one. Anne had long believed that the queen consort role was ceremonial, and that any attempt to expand it into operational territory threatened the clarity of succession. Catherine's role in the aftermath proved more nuanced than public reporting suggested. While she had been deeply upset by the original directive, she had not pushed William to respond publicly. In fact, according to sources close to Kensington Palace, Catherine had initially suggested a private resolution, but William had overruled her preference, determining that private handling would only invite future encroachments. This was not about protecting Catherine alone, he argued. This was about establishing boundaries that would protect the institution. Catherine did, however, make one significant gesture. On Thursday afternoon, she personally called 2 of the charity directors affected by the reversal, thanking them for their patience during the confusion and reaffirming her commitment to their work. The calls, while brief, sent a clear message. Catherine was not gloating over Camilla's humiliation. She was focused on ensuring the charitable work continued uninterrupted. Inside Clarence House, Camilla's staff struggled to process what had happened. Several senior advisors who had encouraged the charitable restructuring began questioning their own judgment. Had they pushed too aggressively? Had they misread the balance of power within the family? Or had they simply underestimated how decisively William would respond to perceived threats to Catherine's work? One advisor, speaking confidentially to a trusted journalist, admitted, "We believe the Queen Consort's position carried more operational weight than it apparently does. That has now been clarified, painfully so." The comment, though intended to be private, eventually leaked and became emblematic of the fundamental miscalculation that had led to this crisis. By Thursday evening, Charles had decided on his own response. He would make no public statement. To defend Camilla would undermine William's authority. To support William would deepen Camilla's humiliation. The only viable option was strategic silence, allowing the situation to resolve itself through the natural passage of news cycles. It was an abdication of sorts, a king choosing not to mediate between his wife and his heir, because any mediation would require choosing sides he could not afford to take. That night, at a private dinner at Clarence House attended only by Charles and Camilla, the conversation reportedly remained civil but strained. Camilla made clear that she felt betrayed, not by William's disagreement but by the public manner of his reversal. Charles, weary and caught between impossible loyalties, could offer only limited comfort. The institutional machinery had moved, and he, despite being king, found himself powerless to reverse its momentum. The humiliation deepens. Friday morning brought no relief. If anything, the media coverage intensified as newspapers moved beyond initial reporting to deeper analysis of what the reversal revealed about power dynamics within the modern monarchy. The headlines were brutal in their directness. William slaps down Camilla's power grab. Future king puts queen consort in her place. Camilla humiliated, as William reasserts control. What made the coverage particularly devastating for Camilla was the way it framed her motivations. Several articles suggested she had been attempting to build a rival power center, positioning herself as a counterweight to William's authority. Others implied that her actions reflected insecurity about her position, a fear that as Charles's health required reduced workload, her own relevance would diminish unless she expanded her portfolio. The Times ran a particularly damaging analysis piece titled "The Queen Consort's Miscalculation," which detailed the history of tension between Camilla and William over operational authority. The article, sourced from multiple palace insiders, painted a picture of a woman who had gradually convinced herself that her role carried more institutional weight than it actually did. The conclusion was withering in its assessment. Queen Camilla appears to have forgotten that her position, while honored, remains derivative of her husband's. The Prince of Wales has now reminded her of that reality in the most public way possible. American coverage took a different angle but reached similar conclusions. Morning shows framed the story as a battle between two strong women, Camilla and Catherine, with William as the deciding force who had chosen to protect his wife over his stepmother. Resonated with audiences and generated enormous social media engagement. By Friday afternoon, Camilla faced a scheduled public engagement, the opening of a literacy center in Manchester. Palace advisors debated whether she should cancel, given the media firestorm, but Camilla insisted on proceeding. To cancel would appear weak, would suggest the reversal had broken her. She would attend, perform her duties, and demonstrate that she remained committed to her work regardless of internal palace politics. The visit was watched with unusual intensity. Photographers captured every expression, every interaction, searching for signs of how the humiliation had affected her. Camilla moved through the engagement with practiced professionalism, smiling with schoolchildren, discussing reading programs with educators, and giving no outward indication of distress. But those who knew her well noticed the subtle differences, the slightly forced quality of her smile, the absence of the spontaneous warmth that usually characterized her public appearances. During a brief media availability, a reporter asked directly about the reverse directive. Camilla paused, her expression tightening almost imperceptibly, before offering a carefully prepared response. "I support all members of the royal family in their charitable work. The most important thing is that the causes we care about receive the attention they deserve." It was a masterclass in diplomatic deflection, acknowledging the situation without engaging with it, but the strain in her voice was unmistakable. Back at the palace, staff reactions revealed a fundamental shift in how power was perceived within the institution. Junior aides, who had previously navigated carefully between Clarence House and Kensington Palace, now understood clearly where ultimate authority resided. Requests from the Queen Consort's office, once treated with near equal weight to those from the Prince of Wales, now received more careful scrutiny and lower priority. One senior household member, speaking anonymously, described the change bluntly. The reversal clarified the hierarchy in a way that years of careful diplomatic language never could. Everyone now knows that when there is a conflict between the Queen Consort and the Prince of Wales prevails. That clarity, while harsh for Camilla, is actually beneficial for the institution. The humiliation deepened when several charities that had previously considered partnerships with Camilla's office quietly withdrew or postponed discussions. While none cited the reversal explicitly, the timing was unmistakable. Organizations that depended on royal patronage for credibility and fundraising could not afford to align with a royal whose authority had been so publicly questioned. By Friday evening, as Camilla returned to London from Manchester, the full weight of what had occurred settled over Clarence House. This had not been a temporary embarrassment or a brief news cycle storm. This had been a fundamental repositioning of power within the monarchy, delivered publicly and irreversibly. And while Camilla would continue her ceremonial duties, Her aspirations for expanded operational influence had been decisively crushed. The new power reality. As the weekend arrived and the immediate frenzy of coverage began to subside, the lasting implications of William's reversal came into sharper focus. This had not been simply about 4 charities or one overreaching directive. This had been about establishing, once and for all, the operational hierarchy within the modern British monarchy. And that hierarchy was now undeniably clear. The constitutional experts who analyzed the situation confirmed what palace insiders already understood. As Prince of Wales and direct heir to the throne, William possessed inherent authority that superseded the Queen Consort's position. Camilla's role, while important symbolically and ceremonially, carried no independent operational power. She could advise, support, and represent, but she could not direct, command, or restructure without the explicit approval of either the king or the heir. This clarification, though delivered harshly, served an important institutional function. For months, the palace had operated in a state of ambiguity, with Camilla's office issuing directives that sometimes conflicted with or duplicated William's initiatives. The resulting confusion had created inefficiencies, frustrated staff, and sent mixed messages to the charitable organizations that depended on clear royal leadership. William's reversal had eliminated that ambiguity in one decisive stroke. For Camilla, the path forward required acceptance of a diminished role, not diminished in dignity or respect, but diminished in operational scope. She would continue her charitable work, attend state functions, and represent the monarchy at appropriate events, but she would do so within boundaries that were now clearly defined and publicly enforced. Any future attempts to expand beyond those boundaries would be met with swift correction. The impact on Charles proved equally significant. His inability or unwillingness to mediate between his wife and his heir had revealed the fundamental limits of his own authority during this transitional period. While still king in title, his reduced workload and health considerations had created a power vacuum that William had moved decisively to fill. The monarchy, in practical operational terms, was increasingly being run by the Prince of Wales, with the king's tacit acknowledgement if not explicit endorsement. Princess Anne's perspective on the situation, shared privately with family members, reflected her characteristic pragmatism. The institution needed this clarification, she reportedly said. Ambiguity breeds conflict. William has provided clarity. Now we can all move forward with a shared understanding of roles and responsibilities. Her lack of sympathy for Camilla's wounded feelings was consistent with her lifelong philosophy that personal comfort must always be subordinated to institutional necessity. For Catherine, the reversal brought both relief and a sobering lesson. Her charitable work had been protected, her decade of effort acknowledged and preserved. But she had also witnessed firsthand how brutally the monarchy could operate when defending its operational clarity. One day, she would be Queen Consort, and the same institutional forces that had just limited Camilla's authority would apply equally to her. The message was unmistakable. No matter how much work you do, no matter how long you serve, your power will always be secondary to the direct line of succession. The charities themselves, after initial confusion, ultimately benefited from the clarity. They could now proceed with long-term planning, knowing that Catherine would remain their primary royal patron, that the relationship they had built would continue uninterrupted, and that future strategic decisions would not be subject to sudden reassignment based on internal palace politics. As Monday arrived and the royal household resumed its regular rhythm, the new reality had settled into place. Camilla attended her scheduled engagements with professional dignity, but noticeably reduced enthusiasm. William proceeded with his work, showing no sign of regret or second-guessing, and Charles navigated between them, attempting to maintain family peace while accepting that the operational dynamics had permanently shifted. The broader public, after days of intense coverage, gradually moved on to other stories, but among royal watchers and constitutional observers, the reversal would be remembered as a defining moment, the point at which the transition from Charles's reign to William's future reign became operationally as well as theoretically inevitable. William had not simply reversed a directive. He had announced, in the most public way possible, that he was ready to lead and would tolerate no challenges to that leadership. For the monarchy as an institution, the episode provided a harsh but necessary lesson. Clear succession planning requires more than theoretical agreement. It requires practical demonstration of authority, public establishment of hierarchy, and willingness to enforce boundaries even when doing so causes personal pain and public embarrassment. William had done all three, and in doing so, he had transformed from a future king waiting his turn into a present authority, actively shaping the institution he would one day lead. The humiliation Camilla experienced would fade with time, though it would never be entirely forgotten. But the power structure William established through that humiliation would endure, providing the operational clarity the monarchy needed to function effectively in an increasingly complex world. Sometimes, the lesson goes, institutions require harsh moments to achieve necessary transformations, and this had been one of those moments, painful, public, and ultimately defining for everyone involved. The story of this reversal will be analyzed for years to come, dissected by historians, debated by constitutional experts, and remembered as a turning point in the modern monarchy's evolution. But perhaps the most important lesson extends beyond palace walls to anyone navigating complex institutions where power, duty, and personal relationships intersect. Clarity, even when it comes with discomfort, serves everyone better than polite ambiguity. And sometimes, the kindest long-term choice is the one that feels harshest in the moment. Where are you watching from today? And what do you think about the balance between protecting personal dignity and establishing institutional clarity? Your perspective adds depth to this ongoing conversation, and I would be honored to hear it. Until next time, take care.